Welcome to another lecture by MedicoMedics, Learning Made Easy. Anatomy, Chapter 9, the Urinary System. In this lecture, we will cover the functions and anatomy of the urinary system, discuss the kidneys, the nephrons, the urine formation, ureter, bladder, and urethra, some urinary system disorders, common diagnostic tools, and end with a summary. Now, what are some functions of the urinary system? First of all, it's involved in removing waste products and excess substances from the blood. It's involved in regulating blood volume and blood pressure. It's involved in maintaining electrolyte and acid-base balance, and further in producing hormones like erythropoietin, and renin. So let's begin with a brief overview of the anatomy of the urinary system. So the major components here are, number one, the kidneys. These filter blood and produce urine. So we have two of those. Then we have the ureters. These transport urine from the kidneys to the bladder. So these are the ureters. Then we have the urinary bladder. This is where urine is stored. And then we have the urethra. This is where urine is excreted out of the body. Now, many times people mix urethra with ureter, so make sure you repeat. A nice way to remember it is that after a long period of not being able to go to the bathroom, and you finally do, you may shout out, Eureka. So it's close to urethra. Works for me. So the kidneys then. The kidneys are bean-shaped organs located in the retroperitoneal space. The structure of the kidneys include the cortex, which is the outer layer, which contains nephrons. So here. Then you have the medulla. That's the inner region containing the pyramids and the collecting ducts. And then you have the renal pelvis that funnels urine into the ureters. So you will find the medulla right here. And you will find the pelvis indeed here. Now, blood supply. So the blood supply to the kidneys come from the renal artery. So it delivers blood for filtration, as seen here. And then we have the renal vein, which returns filtered blood back into circulation. Now let's talk about the nephron, which is the functional unit of the kidneys. And usually when we talk about the kidneys, what we're actually talking about are these nephrons. And you will maybe see why in just a moment. So the structure of the nephron. We have the glomerulus. This is where blood is filtrated, and it's illustrated here. It has a Bowman's capsule. This collects filtrate. So as you can see, the Bowman's capsule is sitting above it or circulating it. So the network of blood capillaries, etc., run through here. Then we have the tubules. So we have the proximal tubule here. It's proximal to the glomerulus, so it's called proximal. Then we have the loop of Henle, because this tube continues downwards, and then it loops back up. This is called the loop of Henle. We then enter the distal convoluted tubule until we finally arrive at the collecting duct. And this is where final adjustments and urine transport occurs. In our lecture on nephrology, in our more clinical classes, we go into more detail into each of these different parts of the nephron, because you have different uptakes and The filtration is different depending on where we are in the nephron. So some functions of the nephron include filtrating blood, reabsorbing water and nutrients, secreting waste products into urine. Now let's mention urine formation. So we have three processes that we need to mention here. We have filtration, which occurs in the glomerulus. It filters waters, ions, and small molecules into the nephron. We then have reabsorption. So essential substances are reabsorbed back into the body, like glucose, water goes back into the blood. But then we have secretion. So we're adding waste products like urea and creatinine to the filtrate. What is the composition of urine? Well, it's about 95% water and 5% solutes, like urea and electrolytes. Now, if you remember from cardiology lessons, you'll learn that our cardiac output averages about 5 liters per minute. And the kidneys receive about 20% of this over an hour. So let's say about 1 liter. So let's say on average, 1 liter of blood, 1 liter per minute arrives at your kidneys. And per hour, that would be around 60 liters, right? That is going to be filtered by the kidneys. However, only about 10 to 12% of this, like 7-8 liters per hour, is actually filtered through the glomeruli to form filtrate, meaning the initial fluid that is entering the nephron. Because most of this filtrate is reabsorbed, indeed. So only about, if you take a guess, how many milliliters, not liters, do you think an average adult produces? How much urine do you think an average adult produces per hour? Surprisingly, it is actually around 60 ml, which means about 1 milliliter is produced per minute. So there is an immense volume going through your filtration system, through your kidneys, but a very little amount arriving as urine ready to be excreted in the toilet. So that should indicate that a lot, the absolute majority, is reabsorbed. And if we have too much urine being produced, several milliliters per minute, this indicates a pathology. There is something called polyuria. And in opposite to that, if we have too little urine being produced, less than half a milliliter, let's say, per minute, now we suspect oliguria. Now, briefly on some other structures again, then. We had the ureter, the bladder, and the urethra. So the ureters are muscular tubes that propel urine to the bladder via peristalsis. Do you remember what peristalsis was when we talked about the gastrointestinal tract? How the esophagus receiving a bolus via its muscles on the side, contracting, producing peristalsis, moving this bolus along. So once that has happened, so we're here, if we want to orientate ourselves in the illustration, we have the ureter. So the kidney has done its filtration, right? It has received blood. It has gone through the glomeruli, through the nephron, and whatever has been left to become urine is now sent down through the ureter to arrive at the urinary bladder. Now, the urinary bladder is a hollow organ that stores urine, and it's lined with transitional epithelium to allow for expansion. So it's flexible, which means you can hold greater amounts of urine for a while, but don't push it. Then we have the urethra, and it conducts urine out of the body. And the length here, interestingly, differs between males and females. And this actually has clinical implications. So, for example, the urethra in men is approximately 20-ish centimeter. So this provides more protections against urinary tract infections, since bacteria that wants to enter have a longer distance to travel to get to the bladder, compared to women, where the urethra is approximately 4 to 5 centimeters. And it makes thus the route or the distance much shorter. So it would then naturally lead to a higher risk of UTIs. So this is a great example of how our anatomical differences have actual clinical implications. And now we come to hormonal regulation. And one very interesting system here that we are presenting is the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, or RAAS. This is involved in regulating blood pressure and fluid balance. We have the antidiuretic hormones, so these promote water reabsorption in the kidneys. Another one, erythropoietin. It stimulates red blood cell production in response to low oxygen levels. But wait a minute, how does the kidney know we have low oxygen? Well, do you remember? The kidneys filtrate blood. So blood that is arriving to your kidneys, right, contain hemoglobin, red blood cells. And this hemoglobin has oxygen with it. And if there is hypoxia, so decreased oxygen levels, your kidney will pick up on this and say, hey, we need more red blood cells to go and bind more oxygen. Now, turning our focus back to the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, this is something that will be repeated throughout your medical career. And looking at this illustration here, you can see, what do we see here? Well, it all starts with a decrease of blood pressure. So without going into too much detail here, because we do it elsewhere in our nephrology course and in our physiology course, etc., your kidneys have these arteries, right, that deliver blood to them. And surrounding structures and cells around a kidney can pick up on pressure changes in this blood flow. So just like we said, it senses low oxygen levels, it can also detect lower pressure, so meaning decreased filtration, etc. When it does that, there are cells here that release something called renin. And this renin is secreted by the juxtaglomerular cells in the kidneys. And when this renin has been released, your liver, separate from your kidneys, your liver releases something called angiotensinogen. Now, what renin then does when it's released is that it will connect with the angiotensinogen, making it into angiotensin 1. When we have angiotensin 1, together with an enzyme that is produced in your lungs called angiotensin converting enzyme, angiotensin 1 becomes angiotensin 2. And angiotensin 2 has multiple effects throughout your body. For example, it causes vasoconstriction in your vascular smooth muscles, so constricting your blood vessels. It tells the pituitary gland, the posterior pituitary gland, to release this antidiuretic hormone, which does what? We just mentioned it here. It promotes water reabsorption. Furthermore, angiotensin 2 also travels to your adrenal cortex, telling it to release aldosterone, and also to your kidneys to pick up and reabsorb more water and more sodium. So let's, for the sake of clarity, repeat all of this one more time. Now, how does our kidney detect low blood pressure? Well, there is a reduced blood flow, right? As mentioned, we have these renal arteries entering the kidneys. Reduced blood flow to these kidneys, or pressure, through specifically the name of these arteries that are entering into the kidneys are called afferent arterioles. And these afferent arterioles gets sensed by these juxtaglomerular cells. And furthermore, we also have very specialized types of cells called the macula densa cells, and they are part of the distal tubule of the nephron. And these detect low sodium levels in the filtration, and low sodium levels often correlates with lower blood pressure. And with that, it has detected a drop in blood pressure, so it releases renin, and this cascade then kicks off with the sole purpose of increasing our blood pressure. So that's the brief introduction to the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. Now let's briefly talk about some urinary system disorders. So we have urinary tract infection. So it's an infection of the bladder, the urethra, or the kidneys. We can develop kidney stones, so crystals form and obstruct the urinary tract. And let me add that this is very, very painful. Then we have chronic kidney disease, so a gradual loss of kidney function. Incontinence, so the loss of bladder control. We can have acute kidney injury, sudden loss of kidney function. What are some common diagnostic tools? Well, we can use urine analysis, where we examine urine composition to detect abnormalities. We do blood tests to measure kidney function, like creatinine or BUN. Imaging, ultrasound, or CT scans to visualize the kidneys and bladder. Biopsies to analyze kidney tissue for diagnosis. Now, to just add some clinical relevance here without going too much into details. So, for example, creatinine. Why do we do this in a blood test? Why do we look at creatinine? Well, creatinine is a waste product, normally formed from the breakdown of muscle. Now, what does it tell us? It indicates kidney function, as creatinine is filtered by the kidneys and excreted in urine. So, if we have elevated levels, it suggests impaired kidney filtration, like chronic kidney disease or acute kidney injury, etc. What about BUN? BUN stands for blood urea nitrogen, and it's a measure of urea, which is a waste product formed when the liver is breaking down proteins. Elevated levels can indicate kidney dysfunction, dehydration, or a high protein intake, or issues with your liver. So creatinine is actually more specific for kidney filtration issues like glomerular filtration rate, GFR. And BUN, blood urea nitrogen, can reflect both kidney function, but also other factors like hydration levels, liver health, protein metabolism, etc. So while we do mention both here, if you want to pick one and say it's the gold standard, it is the creatinine test. So in summary then, the urinary system removes waste and maintains homeostasis. Key organs include the kidneys, the ureters, bladder, and the urethra. Urine is formed through filtration, reabsorption, and secretion. Understanding urinary disorders and diagnostics is indeed crucial for clinical care. And that's the end of this lecture. Continue now to chapter number 10.